I never expected, that I would fall in love with someone who would be sent to prison. I never expected that I would be taking care of a mafia boss.
She calls herself the Dr. Broad.
I was the first female adult cardiologist in the state of Rhode Island. And about 3 years after arriving in Rhode Island, I was asked by his son to take care of the head of the New England Mafia, whose name was Raymond Patriarca.
Dr. Barbara Roberts has a story made for Hollywood. In the 1980s, the cardiologist saved a mafia boss's life.
The Patriarca Crime Family was always in the news. Raymond Sr. had testified in front of the commission that Robert Kennedy had investigating organized crime. And I was asked to take care of him on the night he was arrested and taken to the Situate police barracks.
Trouble was, he was far too sick to go to jail, and Barbara had to convince authorities of the same.
I thought I was just going to go in, introduce myself, check him over briefly, find someone who was okay, and tell his son and his wife, no, he's fine. But instead, what I saw was a man who looked like he had one foot in the grave and the other on a banana peel.
Raymond Patriarca Sr. was a mobster from Providence, Rhode Island, the syndicate boss of the Patriarca Crime Family. Its tentacles stretched throughout New England for more than 30 years.
It's none but a lot of hookwick that you people have been giving me for a long time.
At one time, Rhode Island's Board of Public Safety called him public enemy number 1. By the time Barbara began caring for him in 1980, Raymond Sr. had been a diabetic for 40 years with an amputated toe. He'd had severe heart disease since the 1960s.
I was not a judge, I was not a lawyer, I was not a member of a jury. My job was to fight his severe disease with every tool in the medical armamentarium. I really didn't care whether he was innocent or guilty. My job was to keep him alive.
She did so, and testified numerous times that Raymond Sr. was too frail to stand trial.
He had severe wasting from diabetic neuropathy, so he couldn't even cut his food. He couldn't button his shirt. He was utterly dependent on her for those activities of daily living, and he couldn't walk across a room this size without having angina.
Barbara says caring for Raymond Sr. hurt her reputation between the newspaper articles that came out and her personal troubles.
I was arrested on a trumped-up felony charge of breaking and entering. I was in the process of a very acrimonious custody battle with the father of my youngest child, whom I had never married, but he was still suing me for common law divorce, palimony, and custody of our 4-year-old daughter on the grounds that I was an unfit mother.
Barbara chronicles her script-worthy life in her new book, The Dr. Broad, a Mafia Love Story. Her time caring for Raymond Sr. got a bit more complicated when a chance lunch meeting led her to fall in love with an underworld figure named Louis Minacchio. Known as Baby Shax or Baby Shanks, Luigi Minacchio had a criminal record dating back to the 40s. In 1969, he was indicted for conspiracy in 2 murders.
Within a few weeks, we were lovers. But it had to be very secret and very clandestine, because the believability of my testimony on Raymond's health would have been impaired, if not destroyed, if it became public knowledge that I was having an affair with the alleged number 3 man in the Mafia at that time.
In the 70s, Minacchio was an international fugitive, hiding out at times in Europe from murder conspiracy charges.
In 1979, Minacchio surrendered to authorities, pled guilty to lesser charges, and was sentenced to 30 months in jail. His conviction was overturned.
Well, he tried to make it clear to me that he was a different man than he was before he went away. He said, I realized in those years I spent in France that the people I grew up thinking were heroes, were tough guys. They weren't heroes or tough guys, they were crazy.
One day while she was dating Minacchio, she decided to take a walk in her neighborhood. That would change her life.
A man jumped out from behind a gravestone wearing just a ski mask and sneakers and started beating me. And I screamed, and I was terrified, and all I could think of was my poor children, I'm all they have, and now I'm going to be killed.
But Barbara fought back. An elderly couple walking by heard her screams, and the guy ran off. It was the second time Barbara would survive a sexual assault. The first, she said, happened in college.
How do you go forward, surviving what you have?
both personally and professionally? How does that not just shock you?
It was very traumatic. And I think part of writing this book was a way to work through some of that trauma. But I think I survived because I made a conscious decision to survive. I said, I'm going to survive. I'm not going to let any of this destroy me.
Now telling her story, the staunch feminist, activist, mom, and grandma who broke a barrier isn't afraid of any backlash from the mafia.
I told Raymond Jr., because his father was long dead, that this is what I wanted to do. And he said, Barbara, I know how good you were to my father. I know how you loved him. I'm sure you're not going to write anything that is harmful to him. And I told Louis what I wanted to do, and he said, you do. He's a very private person, but he said, whatever you want to do is fine with me.
Nowadays, Barbara is retired from her private practice, enjoying life with her husband Joe and family. And as for how she came up with that title, The Doctor Broad, it involved the guy she used to date, the press IDing her as Raymond Sr.'s doctor, and a simple phone call.
Johnny said, "Hey, Vinny, remember that Dr. Broad you used to go out with? She's the old man's doctor now." And I thought that was hilarious, because to me a broad was a woman with large breasts and small frontal lobes, and I had just the opposite. At least I'm sure about, the breast part of the equation.
For InsideEdition.com, I'm Stephanie Officer.